Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Ms. Stewart-Cousins, Mr. McLaughlin, good evening.
Good evening, Karen.
In preparation for tonight's discussion, Rich and I reviewed a survey by the Westchester County Association of its members regarding their views on some of the key issues and concerns of the business community. Not surprisingly, many of those concerns are tied with the high costs of doing business here. Overall, though, every day in our reporting and covering of the news in the business sector and the community at large, we hear a growing concern about the escalating costs of living and working in New York State, and particularly in Westchester County. So, Ms. Stewart-Cousins, my first question is to you. It is clear that companies are moving their workers out of Westchester County and that we do have an anti-business climate developing here. When you voted in favor of the MTA tax, which amounts to 34 cents on every $100 of payroll for companies in the 12 counties that are served by the public agency, did you not perceive this as an anti-business tax?
I perceived it, and thank you for the question, Karen. I perceived it as my colleagues who had been in the majority all of 2 months before we were statutorily required to do something to save the transit system. You talk about the economy of Westchester. Clearly, mass transit is a very, very important part of it. When we walked in the door, there was a mismanaged, unmanaged, lack of transparent. There were, at times, 2 books. There was nothing that was accountable in the Transit Authority. We were looking at stopping services substantially, about 50%, raising fares, and the realities were that we had 2 months to solve this very, very difficult problem. We didn't just look at the impact, obviously, but we looked at it how to change what we had. What we had was literally a wreck. And so in our passage of legislation, not only did we bail it out, but we made sure that it is now transparent, that there is forensic auditing that goes on, that there is accountability. So we changed the culture of a system, frankly, that had gone off the rails a long time ago. I am as outraged and upset as everyone that it had been in their condition, and the legislation that we passed when we bailed them out created an opportunity for us to get a handle on it.
Could I just circle back, though, to the business community? The burden was put back on the business community, and certainly folks are very upset about that. So what would you say to the business
Well,
community?
again, what I said then and what I say again is that I fight with my Hudson Valley delegation to withdraw the taxes. We understand that it is a difficult tax. The options were close down half of the abilities for the trains to run, or make fares so that nobody could get to the businesses. Any way you looked at these choices, business would be hurt. So the best thing we could do was to create a mechanism by which this would no longer be the case, that we could put a handle on the MTA and get it. And obviously we are working to withdraw the taxes. We have a new executive director and CEO. I am on record in every hearing, including his confirmation hearing, saying withdraw the tax. At this point, they are still in trouble. But it is a cry that I have for the business community, and we all have in the Hudson Valley. So I don't want anyone to think that we are not aware of it. It was a difficult decision, but the decision to shut down the system would have, I know, hurt the business community even more.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, I'm going to keep on. The payroll tax was imposed, as Ms. Stewart-Cousins said, by the state legislature as part of the financial bailout of the MTA. Presuming that you would vote, if you would, to repeal the tax, what would you suggest as an alternative financial means to support the MTA?
Well, first and foremost, what I'd suggest is that the MTA live within its means. It's absolutely amazing to me that an organization such as the MTA, with millions upon millions of clients and riders using them on a yearly basis, cannot remain solvent. So there are systemic problems in the MTA. The MTA needs to be completely reevaluated and looked at, and it needs to be run like a private business. The problem is that there's every day you open the paper and you see more stories about the MTA. Just this week there was another supervisor who was punching in and going home. Overtime abuses. There needs to be a very hard look at the MTA and what's going on there. And the business community should not be burdened by the MTA. Granted, it serves a lot of the business community and the public who are working in those various jobs. But the problem is, to your point, it wasn't just the MTA tax. I mean, the MTA tax was one of the issues. That has been a real problem for businesses here in New York, and particularly in Westchester and the Hudson Valley. But there's also higher energy taxes that this legislature imposed, 500% increase on utility tax bills, higher health care related taxes, $840 million worth of additional taxes on health care related items, Empire Zone benefits, which create jobs that were repealed. That this legislature, again, just out there, as if it wasn't bad enough for the business community in New York, as if it wasn't expensive enough, they just continue to make it worse. It's almost as if they're going out of their way to kill businesses in New York State.
Mr. McLaughlin, could I just clarify, though, instead of imposing a tax on businesses, would you look to cut services? Would you look for layoffs in the MTA? What sort of recommendations would you make? I would look for a complete restructuring of the MTA. The MTA needs to be completely reevaluated. How it cannot be profitable is beyond me. I would not want to see any increased taxes. I think you'd have to reduce services, you'd have to reduce staff, and get it to live within its means. Okay, thank you.
This question is for Ms. McLaughlin. I saw a press release that your campaign put out where you were quoted as saying, "The budget issue is devastating to the residents and especially the children of Yonkers. Our elected officials in Albany have been AWOL while Yonkers residents are facing draconian cuts that will affect our way of life." You also, throughout your campaign literature, decry the amount of spending that's going on in Albany, and you talk about cutting spending across the board. Which one is it? If the cuts are draconian, affecting your constituents, but you also want to cut, what do you cut and what do you leave on the table if elected?
I can tell you that I would look at a cut, straight across the board. But what's happened in Yonkers specifically, and I can tell you this as the former budget chair, we did a 10-year analysis of the budget of the state funding from Albany to the city of Yonkers specifically, comparing it to Buffalo, Syracuse, and Rochester. Over that 10-year period, the smallest gap between Yonkers, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Rochester was $1.1 billion. The largest gap was over $2.2 billion. In addition, when building facilities and structures, capital improvements that are made in Yonkers, New York, get reimbursed at a much lower rate than they get reimbursed in other areas around the state. So it's a combination of things. If we build a building in Yonkers, we get reimbursed at the rate of about 46 cents on the dollar. If you go up to Buffalo, Syracuse, or Rochester, the average rate, I believe, is somewhere around 91 cents on the dollar. So when you add all of these things and the years and years and years of underfunding because of an alleged education funding formula that I asked to see for the 10 years that I was on the city council, when we go up to Albany, as a CPA, I said, I'd like to see this formula. I'd like to see how it works. I was never provided a copy of that formula. As far as I'm concerned, the formula doesn't exist. So the underfunding in Yonkers has gone on for a long period of time. It's something that needs to be redressed and needs to be straightened out.
As I'm sure